So look, I know things are really, really crazy right now in the world affairs, international affairs here in the Middle East. Currently, as of we are live right now on this Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, high top, of course, Jacksonville, Florida. Again, I know there's a lot of things going on in the world, international affairs, wars going on, but we here talk about college football all year long. There's no, if you want to look for war coverage, go to like CNN, NBC, places like that. We're not doing that here. Of course, this is the Four Verticals podcast. To get episode, what is it now? 160, 168, I believe, 167. Let me see here. Check my notes here. Pretty sure, yeah, 168. How about that? Of course, we're, like I just said, high top. Beautiful. Jacksonville, Florida, really warm today. Going to be warm for the next couple of days, even with the front moving in, cold front moving in. Of course, we do have some severe weather going on today for those of you in the Midwest and the Central Plains, but that's here in Florida. Going to be another beautiful day. But yeah, a lot to talk about college ball-wise. Biggest stories, continuing a new segment we've started up. A lot of things to discuss there. So for the biggest, as spring practices sort of kicking off, it started really this weekend, I believe. Yeah, this weekend is when a lot of spring practices began. Spring camps opened up. We'll talk about some of the biggest stories going into the year as spring opens up. Reasonable expectations for Texas finally hitting the reasonable expectations deck, if you will. They're up next with that. College football historical what-ifs. Got a couple interesting ones here. Then we'll talk about a non-college sport related topic, but it's a topic that we talk about a lot here on the show. Tampa Bay Buccaneers is a fan of the franchise. Huge news yesterday in free agency. Very, very sad news, to say the least. If you are new here, again, welcome in. This is all college ball talk. No international affairs, no war coverage here. We talk college football here twice a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. Schedule permitting. Could be an afternoon like we are right now, live on YouTube, or it could be in the evening. For those of you on Spotify, it doesn't matter as much because you'll get this at some point. We've been a little bit behind on our Spotify postings, but anyway, it doesn't affect you. It affects you guys on YouTube. But yeah, we do this show twice a week, talk college ball. Tomorrow should be able to get out an extra pod. We'll have some content there for sure on Spotify. So again, on Spotify, YouTube, be sure to subscribe over there. That's very, very important. We are independent media, not controlled by anyone. This is our stuff. We own this thing. We own this show. We own the YouTube channel, all of it. So be sure you subscribe to the podcast feed, YouTube channel, social media platforms. Be sure to hit the button, subscribe button, somewhere down here. You don't have to turn on notifications. That's not required, but that's one thing we do to ask for you is to subscribe to the channel. With some water real quick here, we'll go into some big stories. Again, we've been doing this for about a week now. Actually, I haven't had 2 weeks. Actually, it hasn't been 2 weeks or 1 week. I don't know. I don't remember. A lot of things have been happening behind the scenes, both in my own personal life and, of course, world news. It's hard to keep track of everything, but we're going to try to get a show done properly here. Hopefully nothing breaks on air as we're live here as of 2:05 here in the afternoon East Coast time. So we'll get to water real quick and we'll get started with our first topic. College football's biggest stories in 2026. Did this last week, I believe. Yeah, last Thursday. We did this, started doing this. Let's go through some more here. A lot more to talk about. A lot of stories, as spring practice is opening up across the country. A lot of all different universities are opening up their spring practice for college football. Just some stories. Again, we'll do this for the next month or so. Just big stories we are looking forward to, whether it's on the field, off the field, related to college football or not, directly to the actual games. It doesn't really matter. We'll talk about it. First one up here as we do a Josh Pitt stop here, Pop. Is Clemson going to rise up, or is the downward trend going to continue? Been a very big talking point about Clemson football. A lot of folks hitting on Dabo Swinney. Guy's a legend, right? He's won 2 national titles, been to 3 of them. I believe, 3 of them. Multiple college playoff appearances, ACC accomplishments. He has everything sort of having a Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, he's had number 1 overall draft picks. I mean, the one thing he does not have, Dabo Swinney, is a Heisman Trophy winner. Believe it or not, none, which is kind of shocking given how much they've had success. But anyway, of course, they've been really ever since 2020. After Trevor Lawrence leaves, Travis Etienne leaves, all those guys from 2020 and even 2019 leave. Guys who were essentially freshmen in 2018. I think, yeah, 2018, who were freshmen then. Once they all left, starting in 2021 and 2022, 2023, 2024, now here we are now in 2026, 2025, things have really started to fall off very, very quickly. We've seen like the rise and then sharp fall Florida State. We've seen Miami rise, if you will. So they went from being Miami 5-7 to now 10 wins the previous year, and then last year 11. Actually, not 11. I think 14 now. Actually, I think, yeah. So we've seen every team sort of take Clemson's spot, right? We've seen every team sort of take advantage of Clemson being down, even Pitt and Wake Forest, right? So the question really is, it's more or less a question, but it's also a story as well. Will this sort of downward trend or this downward trajectory for Clemson continue? I don't know. We've seen them dabble into the portal just a little bit. We've seen them stable, steady at recruiting. I mean, it's not like top 10 recruiting, but it's not like they're in the like top like 50 either, somewhere between. But it's a real question. Will this continue? Will Dabo Swinney and his program sort of become stale? Kind of like, the comparison I've seen a lot of folks throw out with Clemson, ironically, is your big rival, Florida State, in the ACC, right? Florida State under Bobby Bowden towards the very end. And look, he's a legendary coach, right? Bobby Bowden passed away a few years ago. A legend, right? But the one thing a lot of folks at Florida State, especially folks who have followed the program, like, for example, 247 cover threes, Bud Elliott has brought this up multiple times, that towards the end of Bobby Bowden's career at Florida State, things are very, very stale. Recruiting have fallen off. Innovation that sort of was really not really existent anymore. So there was this sort of like very slow depth, right? It was sort of the, just the inevitable, he's going to retire. This thing is kind of, just coasting. It's just more or less Clemson or Florida State was basically just existing for a little bit. That's what Clemson's heading towards, to just being existing. Like they just exist in college football. Like they're just there. Like they're just the tiger paw has no meaning anymore, or at least doesn't put fear into you. It used to, but not anymore. So a lot of folks thought last year, okay, you bring back Kate Klubnik, it's Garrett Riley, third year as the offensive coordinator. You thought, okay, they can maybe get something going and go back to the ACC championship game, make it to the college football semifinal. They went, I believe, 7-6 last year, right? So they didn't do any of that. I mean, heck, they almost lost to Troy, I believe, week 3. So it was not smooth sailing last year, and they got blown out by Syracuse and all that stuff. So it was not smooth sailing for them. It was very, very difficult. It has been difficult. Even in the years that they've had a good record, it's been kind of this, well, things are kind of stale, but we'll accept it. And this is me speaking for Clemson fans. We'll accept it because his dad, we still love him. He's a legend. We'll build a statue of him if you haven't had one ready yet. But again, much like Bobby Bowden at Florida State, well, he's a legend or anything, you can say all that stuff. It's still getting stale. Like, it's not getting, like, it's not, again, Clemson is just existing. And a lot of us who have watched college football for a long time, at least recently, especially with our, short memory, some of us, that we remember Clemson not just existing, but they were the sort of the kings of college football for a long time. I mean, not a long time, but for a period of time. I mean, they won 2 national championships. They've been to 3 of them. So that's when, back then, and it's kind of weird to say that now, back then, in the old days, Clemson didn't just exist. They were a threat. Now they just exist. Like they're just the tiger paw is just there. Like you just look at it and go, oh, all right, it's Clemson, whatever. That's not Clemson football in the modern era. That's not what Dabo Swinney built Clemson on. Now, you can make the argument that, and I'm not trying to turn this into a whole, Dabo Swinney segment, but there is a thing about using having doubt being a motivating factor. It's good for a certain extent, but eventually folks are going to stop doubting you, and there's no momentum. Like there's nothing to be motivated about, or there's nothing to use, or you can't use doubt as motivation when the doubt's not there anymore. Because no one was doubting you after 2018, right? A lot of folks just thought, all right, this is who Clemson is. We shouldn't doubt him anymore. Sort of the same attitude that people, at least externally, not internally, externally had with Nick Saban in Alabama, right? After a couple years, you start doubting them. You just go, all right, automatically pencil them in to at least be at the national championship game. That's what at least happened to Clemson, right? Clemson thought, okay, folks will still doubt us. We'll continue to use the doubt as fuel. But eventually, you start to win so much, people stop doubting you, and thus that fuel is no longer usable. You can't use it anymore. And I think that's contributed to where Clemson is, not to mention their reluctance to adapt to major college football, at least quickly, right? Like, for example, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss adapted very quickly. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri adapted very quickly. In fact, I think he was one of the first ones to do NIL publicly. So, yeah, Clemson, can they, is this going to be a continued downward trajectory? I think a lot of folks are very worried that this is going to be the new norm for Clemson, unless Dabo just retires and they bring in someone else. I don't know. So that's one. That's a big story there that no one's really talking about as much. This next one, another big story. Alabama being able to run the football. They didn't do it last year. They were one of the worst P4 teams, or well, not P4, but P2 teams to run the football last year. They have to be better. They have to be better. Now, and of course, you hear about, they fired their offensive line coach to bring someone else in. Range, that wasn't the only issue, but it was the classic, well, you got to fire someone. So, all right, offensive line coach, pretty simple. We'll swallow that money. Tell them to go away. And the previous offensive line coach, now they bring in someone else. So, it could work out, but I think it was interesting for Bama, for them to run the football. Assuming that Keelan Russell is a starter, right? We don't know if he will be the starter. It's him or Austin Mack, as, of course, now camp is opened up. So now if it's Keelan Russell, now again, I'm not saying Austin Mack can't run the football. He can. He's more closer to, Ty Simpson than he is to Jalen Milroe or Keelan Russell. Keelan is definitely more like Jalen Milroe. Pure runner in a certain way, a good dual threat quarterback. Him being a more of a willing runner and him being a really good tool in the running game, combined with maybe some philosophical changes with Bama's O-line and when it comes to running the football, I think that could be a very, very interesting story just to watch throughout the year. Like, could the Bama running game improve so much? Even just changing one thing, which is getting a running quarterback in there. That could be that could be the opportunity, right? Because you have Russell as the starter. Keelan Russell, again, he brings a dynamic. He brings a different dimension to the running game. He's a running quarterback, so it's it's a facet of the run game that you don't always account for. But having looked at Killing the Board over the years, he is known as his offense is a run-based offense. Again, that's the big misconception, right? People think, Killing the Board at Washington with Michael Penix and throwing the football all over the place. They threw the football, but they also ran the ball really, really well. It's the same thing people get confused with the whole Baylor, Bryles, veer and shoot stuff, right? With Tennessee's running, what Auburn's running. They are not an air raid offense, okay? This is not Mike Leach, rest in peace. This is not Mike Leach, threw the football a million times a game. They run the football. So last year was so jarring because we all assumed with Killing the Board, those of you who follow the sport closely, just thought, okay, it's Killing the Board. It can, he's known for being, having a good success running the football with his offense. It should be no problem, right? It should be all good. Well, it wasn't all right. And I think it was a big miscalculation on a lot of folks, including me. So maybe, again, I'm not saying like Ty Simpson, like him being the starter was like handicapping Alabama and running the football. No, it wasn't. But having someone like a Keelan Russell, kind of like what you have Jalen Milroe a couple of years ago, having that sort of running quarterback dynamic back there, it helps open up certain things, right? It helps you maybe use different tactics you weren't using before with a more, balanced field general quarterback, right? And not to mention, too, I think the offensive line philosophy, it probably didn't need to change. I don't know if firing the offensive line coach was the right move or the necessary move, but again, I think just seeing that develop again, it really does sort of, I guess, kind of hinge on Keelan Russell, but it doesn't matter whether it's him or Austin Mack. Just Bama run the football in general. You need to, if they want to be successful and to complete a lot of their goals and aspirations, they have to run the football. That is basically a non-negotiable. So that is it. I'm interested to see how that develops starting week 1. Next up here, Oklahoma. Another big story building off of what happened last year, right? They get to the playoff. They beat Bama last year. A lot of folks forget that. They beat them. I know they all remember the playoff game in Norman, but the first game, the first of the 2 games last year, and if you want to go that route, it was 1-1. OU won in Tuscaloosa. They were the only team, they're the first team since LSU in 2019 to be a conference, I'm pretty sure, to be a conference opponent, current conference opponent. Texas does not count. To be a current conference opponent in the SEC to win in Tuscaloosa. Before that, before you did it last year, it was LSU in 2019. It's a long time ago. That was the last decade. So that's pretty remarkable. So that happened last year. So of course they won. They get to the college football playoff. They go 10-2. And they lose their playoff against Bama and the collapse. So the question really, or the story is, can they build off of that? Right? You bring back Arbuckle, the OC. You bring back Jean Mateer. Yes, you lose some parts of the offense and defense, but largely you bring back the nucleus, right? John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle, the OC. Of course, you still have, Brent Venables being the defensive coordinator, Sudo as the head coach. I think, at least I think that Oklahoma, given again what they have coming back, and look, the schedule is very difficult, right? You go to Michigan, a team that is going to be wanting revenge on you after what happened last year. Especially, even more interesting with the new coaching staff. They were there with Kyle Whittingham coming in. So, those of you who don't remember, yes, Kyle Whittingham is now the head coach of Michigan. Hopefully, you guys remember that because he is the coach currently there in Ann Arbor. Because Sherrone Moore was unceremoniously fired. If you don't remember that whole fiasco, that feels like 10 years ago. But anyway, so yeah, I'll be interested to watch. Will the defense improve? Well, what were the lessons learned last year? Right, that's sort of probably the overarching narrative, right? Is what were the lessons learned from last year? Again, there's a lot of good things you did, right? You beat Bama, you made it to the college football playoff. You went 2-0 versus the state of Alabama. The state of Alabama, not a lot of teams said that last year. Very few, to be fair. So, at least actually, you were the only one that went 2-0, I believe, against both teams from the state of Alabama last year. So yeah, you were 2-0 last year. The only team to do it, at least in the regular season. So again, I just wonder again, what were the lessons learned last year? Even with all the success, what were the lessons learned? Will they be able to build off of the success last year? Because again, ever since Brent Venables has been there, it's been very, very seesawish. It's been his first year 6-7. Then you win 10 games the second year. I know the reference there. I know it's a lot of folks will go in the comments and say, oh, you did this, you missed the 6-7 thing. So there, I did it. That's the one time I'm doing it. So you went 6-7 the first year, 10 wins the second year, and then you did the same record as you did your first year. Then you won 10 games again. So is the hypothetical yo-yo going to go back to the other side again, where you're going to go have a losing season? I hope not. I hope we have sort of moved on from that. But yeah, that is going to be interesting to see how, what were the lessons learned from last year from OU, and can they build off of last year, the success, right? But also learn from the mistakes. And then finally, another big story here, no one's really talking about, is Luke Fickell, right? Luke Fickell, everyone thought he was the next, boy wonder, right? He was at Cincinnati, got into the college football playoff a year or so after, takes the Wisconsin job. It's been very disappointing. I'll just say, I think this hire and the Scott Frost hire in Nebraska are probably going to go down as the worst miscalculation and the coaching, the coaching carousel era, at least from what I can remember. I know a lot of folks will put, Lincoln Riley's up there too, right? He hasn't been fired yet, much like Luke Fickell, but I think Fickell's in more trouble than Riley is. I think Fickell has been, I think him, Scott Frost, at least in the modern era, like from 2010 onward, the last decade or so, probably the two worst miscalculations in the college football coaching carousel. Will he save his job? It's an uphill battle, that's for sure. I mean, their schedule doesn't get that much better, from what I can tell. I guess actually that's a lie. Actually, I think look this up. I'm pretty sure doesn't it level out just a little bit? At least it's a little bit more workable. Let me check here. Do some research on the fly here. I mean, let me see here. 2026 Wisconsin schedule. Let me see here. It is. You play Notre Dame. I forgot about this. It's neutral site for HU. It's down the road in Green Bay at Lambeau Field. Penn State on the road, Iowa. That's on home. USC. Those are probably your 3 games you're gonna be dogs in. The rest of them, it's a coin flip. So, yeah. Honestly, it's more or less they kind of got a sneaky favorable schedule, believe it or not. So, take back what I just said earlier, saying it's a tough schedule. Yes, there's tough games on there, right? You have USC, Iowa, Penn State, Notre Dame, right? That's non-negotiable. You're going to be dogs in those games. More likely, even though some of them are at home, like USC, probably not going to be very, very favorable for you. But the rest of the schedule, Michigan State, new coaching staff with Pat Fitzgerald. You have UCLA, new coaching staff, Rutgers, Maryland, Purdue, Minnesota. Especially that stretch there with Maryland, Rutgers, Purdue, Minnesota, from November 7th all the way down to the last weekend with Paul Bunyan's axe with the Minnesota game. That's very favorable. You can go 4-0 in that stretch. You could. I mean, they brought in a lot of transfers. They're at least trying. Okay, at least they're trying, but it's an uphill battle, man. And it still is. And just maybe, if they can go, 7 wins, 8 wins, I think Luke Fickell is going to be back for another year. I think they'll try it again. They'll just delay it to another year. I think that's the hope they're giving. And honestly, it's probably more hope than what you were getting at in Tallahassee with Mike Norvell. We just talked about him last week, right? In this segment, believe it or not. So that's another story too. Can Luke Fickell save himself here? Unlike Scott Frost, who couldn't do that. He didn't have he didn't have the ability to do that. I think Fickell, if you have in this schedule, I wasn't intending for that to rhyme, but given the schedule he's been dealt with, there's a possibility they could potentially have a good year. Granted, it is a workable schedule, but still, I mean, that's a better, better than what it was last year. I mean, that's the bright side of it. I mean, I guess the comparison would probably be Neil Brown at West Virginia a couple years ago, right? I think the one, I believe his second to last year, they won 9. They won 9 games. Now, granted, it wasn't the regular season, but they won 8-4. The year before that, they went 5-7 or something like that. It was almost fired. So that's kind of the comparison here is Neil Brown, right? You just have a year. You just happen to get a very, very favorable schedule after getting a difficult one last year, and you somehow make it work. And then the year after, you hope and pray, right? So that's another story too. I'm looking forward to this season in college football. Next up here is reasonable expectations. Texas is on deck. Next, we'll get some more water here as we merrily move along. And again, a very, very warm day here in Jacksonville. It's going to be near 90, I think, today, and I think also tomorrow as well. Very similar. It almost preview of summer. We had on Sunday afternoon thunderstorms. It felt like June and July up here. Crazy, but I mean, at least today is pretty warm. I mean, there's no clouds in the sky at all. It's a cool blue sky day up here in Chamber. At least more or less aesthetically, it's a Chamber of Commerce day. I was going to say it's total Chamber of Commerce, but it's not. It's really warm out. But visually, it's a Chamber of Commerce day. The temperature-wise, not really. It is pretty warm, but at least warm-ish. Anyway, so again, as we are kind of stopping here a little bit in the midpoint, the show's not done. We're just kind of taking a little breather here. Again, subscribe. YouTube channel, podcast feed. Again, on YouTube here, prayer hands. Okay, subscribe. That's all we're asking for. Right. Reasonable expectations. Texas. Big year for Sark. He's not getting fired or anything, at least I don't think. Big year for him. Last year kind of was what it was. It was a sweet and sour year in and on a very, very sweet note. Started out very sour. You had some moments, right? Bad moments. The Ohio State game, the Florida game. And you had some good ones, right? Beating OU, beating Texas A&M for the first time as conference rivals again in a while. So there were good moments in the bowl game against Michigan, right? Albeit that staff there was a zombie staff. It was like Biff Poggi was the interim head coach. So it ended up pretty well, and you had a very good. You filled up your coffers in the transfer portal. You spent a lot of money, right? You bring in Cam Coleman, you bring in Hollywood Smothers, who at one point committed to Bama, decommitted, and goes to Texas. So your roster, especially at the receiver position, again, I know a lot of Auburn fans, a lot of Auburn, folks and other people within the industry will say, well, Cam Coleman made it tonight. He wasn't the best leader. That might be true. And look, we'll see what happens at Texas, right? If things start to bubble beneath the surface of him and he is really a clown, then fine, right? And then, whatever. But in terms of pure talent, I mean, the guy is uber talented. And it's a shame that he had to deal with, freaking Jackson Arnold and Patrick Thorne, whatever his name was, Peyton Thorne, two really dumpster fire quarterbacks, like two garbage QBs. So we have not really seen him, Cam Coleman, play with an elite quarterback. And we saw spurts of it when Ashton Daniels, when they fired Hugh Freeze Auburn last year, and the Vanderbilt game was probably the best game of his career at Auburn. Had a lot of insane catches. So we've seen spurts of it, but it's not been very consistent, right? And again, if you don't remember, he, being Cam Coleman, was in the same recruiting class of not only Ryan Williams, who now is being known as, what is it, Coleman Ryan Williams or something like that. Williams Coleman or something. I think it should be to his mom, but anyway, I still prefer him as Ryan Williams. So you had Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith. Cam Coleman was in that same recruiting class. Like in fact, he was actually, I think, rated higher than Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams was not even he wasn't even in that class to begin with. He reclassified. It was him and Jeremiah Smith were like one A, 1B, right? So they're honestly, they were tied for the best receiver in the country, and Auburn had him. And unfortunately, they trotted out two crappy quarterbacks. So, and not to mention a very outdated offense. So we have not seen him with a real legit offense. He will be with Steve Sarkisian. I will guarantee you that. I think with Arch Manning coming back and his development, him getting better, I think him utilizing his legs more, him being more of a runner and also for. But that portal that whole portal shipment, if you will, not just recruiting class, is a portal shipment. They are going to be respecting, being Texas people. It's not a Texas notification from ESPN. They will be expecting Texas people to have massive results, to say the least. And even with them going to the cultural playoff in the first year in the SEC and making it to the SEC championship game. So on top of that, so it's going to be very, very high expectations up there. A lot of pressure, competitive pressure. I don't think it's hot seat pressure on Sark. I think it's warranted, right? Given this shipment of this brought in talent, questionable, as it may be in terms of the behind the scenes, if you will. But on field, no questions in terms of the talent being brought in, whether it's recruiting or transfer portal. You have Arch back. You bring in Will Muschamp. Welcome back to Major College Football as a DC. Back at Texas again, second time. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Sark, no doubt. And I think, even with their schedule, again, they do, they host Ohio State. Think about that. But that's going to be a mega game. It could be once again another game of the century type level game. More likely to be 1 versus 2, I would imagine. Oh, yeah, the rest of your SEC schedule kind of is what it is. Again, there's a lot of pressure. I get that, but it is warranted, and I think it is respected, if you will, that they are going to be at least reasonable expectations would assume that you will be in the college football playoff race, national title hunt, SEC championship hunt. All those should be there. So yeah, if you're looking at reasonable, just baseline expectations, college football playoff appearance, national title maybe, 10 wins plus. I think that is your expectation. If anything less than that, at least from a fan perspective, if I were a Texas fan, I would feel disappointed. But as a college football analyst, it's like, well, at least in my point of view, the recalibration of expectations is not fully realized in terms of records, right? A lot of folks assume that 10-2, 11-1, that's still reasonable. For a fan, it is, but if you're looking at it realistically, in the modern realm of college football, 9-3 is also on the table, and that shouldn't be looked as a bad thing either. That's like 9-3 is a new 10-2, so 9-3 can also be in there as well as a reasonable expectation. You may not like it, you may not like the way it sounds, like, oh, gross, 9-3, but again, with the modern, with conference realignments, schedules getting beefed up, adding more layers to the hypothetical sandwich, if you will. 9-3s are going to be in the college football playoff, and we had it last year. I think we did. Actually, no, we did. I don't think we did. Did we? I don't know. Should know this, but I mean, either way, I think a 9-3 Texas, yeah, they'll be in the playoff. I think they should, but at least they would. I mean, should they or should they not? Is personal opinion, but if they will be in the playoff, then they will. But again, yeah, I think reasonable expectations. The portal shipment they brought in this past cycle, only cycle, has to pan out, and they have to. I think if you're a Texas fan, be in the playoffs and at least be a challenger for the national title. That is reasonable. Records wise, look, 9-3 could be on the table, given the conference you're in, and given that you have your non-conference opponent in Ohio State, and the fact that the SEC has gone to non-conference games, right? So that'd be interesting to see there for Texas and how the fans will respond. if things are less than a comfortable like national title appearance. Like again, I think there's a whole bunch of realms of possibilities as to where that could go. The disappointment level, if you will. What if time here for college football historical what ifs? A lot of interesting ones here. So again, we started this a couple weeks ago. Basically, what this is us going back in a time machine, and in a lot of cases, it's not that far away, but in this case, it is pretty far. Hop back in the time machine, sort of. What if certain things change? It can be on the field, could be off the field, as one of them, our last one. Just little changes here that are made to change the sort of the butterfly effect, right? Certain things, you change one thing, basically, creates a whole new timeline. First one, what if Alabama beats Ohio State in 2014, right? That classic Sugar Bowl game. I think a lot of folks use that game, Ohio State Bama in 2014, as like the quintessential benchmark college football playoff game, whether it's the 4-team or the current era, 12-team era. This is the best game. I think I would agree. Best quality type game. If they beat Ohio State, that happens, in Bama, I don't know how do they win it, whether it's an overtime or to actually blow them out instead of Ohio State winning the game and winning the whole national title. I think if they do beat them, obviously keep everything else rest the same, right? So Oregon puts Florida State in a body bag, and they end up in Dallas and they meet Bama. Does the result change in Oregon losing that game? Probably doesn't change it. I think it stays the same, essentially. I think Bama wins the national title, and actually that would actually give Nick Saban even another additional national title. So yeah, that Ohio State with Urban Meyer, if that's the case, if nothing else changes, he leaves Ohio State after 2018 with no national titles. So that changes. That's the one big thing that would change is that, or two big things. One, Bama gains another national title under Nick Saban. Well, gains another national title in general, but gains one for Nick Saban. And then Ohio State, of course, didn't win one with Urban Meyer. They don't. Again, if you change that one thing, that one result, keep everything else the same. The rest of the history stays the same. When Urban resigns or retires at the end of the 2018 season after the Rose Bowl, he ends up with no national title, which is very, very weird. So, I mean, look, his legacy in general wouldn't be like completely tarnished, though I would grant you if the other stuff off the field happens with, referring to Zach Smith, you maybe see a small change there. Because remember at the time, there were, legit reports saying, hey, they're going to fire him for cause. I think his entire career would be, somewhat smeared even more without the national title. But luckily in the current actual real life timeline, he did win one. But in this timeline, he doesn't. So that may change a little bit, at least the willingness to get rid of him, potentially. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that for sure, but at least that might be on the table. So, yeah, Bama beating Ohio State, winning the national title, changes their history for Bama and changes Urban Meyer's career at Ohio State very, very differently. Sticking to the Big Ten and Ohio State's big rival, Michigan. What if they don't hire Rich Rod in 2007? Of course, Michigan, they have that 2007 season for the most part, a total disaster. They let Lloyd Carr retire, bring in Rich Rod, total outsider, has no connections to the state of Michigan, I don't think he did. No, at least I don't imagine he did. Of course, afterwards they tried to, obviously Michigan, of course, corrected it and went a different direction with Brady Hoke and obviously Harbaugh, but they bring in Rich Rod. And, of course, you saw what happened. They had multiple losing seasons, right? He eventually gets fired. What if they didn't do that? What if they brought in someone else? I don't know who that had been, right? I mean, you just go down the list. I mean, did they try to get Harbaugh earlier? Because I think at that point he was at Stanford, right? So you wonder, hey, could we have, what if Michigan went after Harbaugh earlier? And he goes there. Does Michigan, eventually win a national title? Does that whole losing streak with Michigan or with Ohio State not happen in the 2010s? Like, that's really, really interesting. And also, if think about, talking about what Michigan does, what does, what happens with Rich Rod, right? Does he stay at West Virginia his entire career? Does this little tenure at Arizona not happen? That's very interesting. My opinion, I think Rich Rod, if he does not take the Michigan job, and again, we're assuming that the Bama thing doesn't happen in 2006. Again, everything up to this point until 2007, it stays the same. Rich Rod probably, I don't know if he is totally just running a whole empire at West Virginia, winning multiple. Of course, that in the future they'll eventually be in the Big 12. But does West Virginia sort of become a national a very, very recognizable national brand, right? Do they sort of develop into that? Do they sort of become a very dominant team? Did they sort of like become like the dominant new team in the Virginias, right? Between the two states, right? With major, schools, the programs there. Did they sort of level up even ahead of Virginia Tech, right? I don't know. That's a fair question to ask, right? So that's an interesting one to look at. Both on the Michigan side of things, did they go after Harbaugh earlier instead of going after Brady Hoke, and then eventually getting to Harbaugh? And then for Rich Rod, does he stay at West Virginia? Does he move on, or does he? What happens with him? That's interesting. And also, does like West Virginia, they win the national title at some point? That's interesting. And then finally, last one here. What if the NCAA video game, NCAA college, the NCAA football video game series hadn't got canceled? If you guys don't remember, of course, now we have the game back now. Obviously, it's a different name, and a lot has changed since then. But for a long time, this game, again, a lot of folks, maybe a little bit too young to remember, we didn't have a college football game for 13 years, almost 13 years. It's been a very, very long time up until a couple of years ago when the game finally came back. A lot of folks are still, relying on, their old Xbox 360. And, for my personal story, mine was still running. And then eventually the disc laser broke. And unfortunately, the game wasn't, I didn't have it purchased on Xbox Live or on the Xbox store at the time. So I couldn't even access it through there. So literally, there was a time for a couple of years where I couldn't play it, the actual game. Now, luckily, it wasn't that long because the game was eventually coming back. But anyway, so yeah, there was a while where this game did not, it was not around, right? And it was very, this time of year from like February all the way until August was very different for about 10 plus years, right? Now, locally, you had shows like, Josh Pate and Cover 3 start to rise up to that kind of, they sort of began carrying the water for, making you invest in college football. Because at least for me and a lot of other folks, that video game when you had when it was still around and if you had still access to it, that was sort of your way of getting through spring and summer, right? It was your way of keeping you invested in college football because you were playing the game and, you sort of get absorbed into a dynasty mode and it makes you think about what's happening in currently college football. So like, hey, the video game, when it was originally going on, even now, is a marketing tool. It it's an appendix, if you will, of the college football marketing machine. And when that went away, that piece of marketing was gone. You lost a lot of people. A lot of folks didn't know what to do. And again, thankfully, you had shows like Josh Pate and Cover 3 rise up to, kind of keep you invested in college football and sort of be an extension of that college football marketing, right? But that's the original video game series, the NCAA football video game series, helped us throughout this time of the year. And of course, now the game back now, if it hadn't gotten canceled, it makes you wonder, do those shows become as popular, right? Josh Pate's show, does Cover 3 become popular? Because again, had that game, when that game was popular and now that it's back, that was, or it is now, a way for people to kind of cope with, big time college football fans like me, the sickos, to at least get their college football on a daily basis, right? To at least have the ability to watch or even, watch or play games on Saturday. You still have games on Saturday, even though it's spring, albeit it's a simulation. But the real question is, again, if the series doesn't get canceled, are they still continue making games? Nothing changes, and there's no lawsuits and stuff like that. Of course, the opposite of the game, it just develops into, kind of what we get eventually now with the playoff and modern graphs and stuff like that. So that's easier to predict. But the other side of it, again, do shows like Cover 3 or Josh Pate's show, do they rise? Do they become popular? Because again, this video game was a way for people to, again, cope with the spring and summer months when there was no games going on. But when the game was canceled and folks moved on, they moved on to these YouTube shows, right? Josh Pate and Cover 3. Does that change? Do folks just get hooked on with just, the recruiting websites and going on, looking at articles and stuff? And I don't know. It's really tough to say. Now, personally, I kind of feel like those shows, Cover 3 and Josh Pate, would have gone popular anyway. But I kind of do wonder if the audiences would have been a lot smaller. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the game, if it had continued, not gotten canceled, maybe those shows are even more popular. Who knows? Anyway, but yeah, that's an interesting what if there again. The sort of the actual gaming side of things, not much changes. I think eventually you would have gone to the current state of the game we have right now, which is it coming back, and at least the version we have now with it coming back. But again, if it hadn't gotten canceled, I think from a visual standpoint, gameplay standpoint, I don't think that really changes because you eventually get what we have now. But from the other side effects, again, the sort of rise of college football YouTube shows. Did they become even more popular? Become less popular? Who knows? And then lastly here, and then we'll move on in the show. And that's it for the what ifs, by the way. College football what ifs. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So yeah, big news yesterday. Work for paper pop. Mike Evans is no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. He is now with the San Francisco 49ers. That was announced yesterday. It was sort of teased out throughout the weekend from like Scott Reynolds at Peter Report. A lot of those folks over there, the beat writers, they were saying, look, guys, there's a real possibility it's done. He's not coming back. And it's confirmed now. He's no longer with Tampa. I would just say this. Now, I know it's kind of interesting because we've been very, very quiet about this on the Big Show. Now, we talked about it on the Extra Pod, ironically, back around Christmas. Now, back then, I thought, okay, they would, make a push to keep Mike around. At least when I was hearing, which was still true, that Mike was willing to still be around. He wanted to be like Calvin Johnson, right, with the Lions. Even though they were so bad, Calvin, much like Mike Evans, has sort of been accustomed to the Buccaneers' life, right? It was a Buck for life. But things changed, and I think the one big change was the season, the way the season ended, right? With the whole 3rd and 28 during the Falcons game and that whole collapse, and the videos leaking, well, not leaking out, but those videos getting out of Mike slamming his helmet down after the game's over and he's pissed off, and the rumors even started then, hey, is this the end? Is this the beginning of the end for him? Because again, we all knew that they were going to have to pay him more money to keep him around. So that was the start. The Falcons Thursday night collapse was the start. The Bucs not firing Todd Bowles, the decision to keep him, I think, played a role. I think it's very, very clear that was a role. And I think it's pretty obvious. He's going from Todd Bowles, an unproven offensive coordinator, brand new offensive coordinator hired, to a proven commodity in the 49ers. Yes, they're an older team, and Evans is an additional older player, but they're still good. I mean, they're a very functional franchise. Their offense is very, very consistent when it's healthy, by the way. I know a lot of Bucs fans will say, well, the team, we beat them, back, last September, they were, it was very, very easy. That's true, but the team was beat up. They were like a beat up tin can. They were a show what they ended up being, which is a playoff team, well, as Tampa was not. So, yeah, I blame this on Todd Bowles, and I blame this on the Glazers and Jason Light. This was a mistake. And I think I think a lot of folks, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you've probably heard of this theory that I've had about what happened this time last year, kind of. I know it's a bit past, but this time last year when, Liam Cohen came in as the OC for Tampa the previous season, they win 10-7. They lose in the wild card round to Washington. There was the thinking, at least publicly, hey, Liam was going to stay around. Everyone's happy, even though they lost. There was still this hope of, things could get a lot better. This could be, potentially one of the best teams in the NFC, right? Well, then you get the whole fiasco of Liam Cohen. We'll hear, won't he come back? He signs extension, but it turns out he didn't. He goes back to here in Jacksonville, of all places, and interviews again with Sean Conn of the ownership here with the Jags, and he ends up being hired. My theory is that last year that there were whispers and rumors about Todd Bowles potentially retiring, right? And it kind of plays, at least that's what I'm thinking. But there were rumors internally about, hey, Todd may not be back next year. He may retire. He's getting a little bit older, right? I'm sure folks were telling Liam, hey, if Todd retires, you might be the next head coach. Just don't leave yet. But then it turns out Todd isn't coming back. So that's why I think you saw Liam just say, all right, they're not, Todd's still here. This job here in Jacksonville, it's still open. I'm going to take it. It's still available. But I think it's interesting that seeing what happened with Mike Evans, him leaving almost makes you wonder now, speaking of what ifs, we just did that a few minutes ago. What if Liam Cohen was the head coach here of Tampa? If he was the coach here and he hadn't, if Todd Bowles retires and he doesn't take the Jags job and he stays in Tampa and he's, promoted. I don't think Tampa misses the playoffs and the offense is way more consistent. I think you see a huge improvement. And also, I think Mike Evans is still a Buccaneer. I think he is. I think the decision to keep Todd Bowles last year and keeping him now the way last season went, the collapse in the Falcons game, that to me just culminated in just Mike Evans saying, "Look, I love Tampa, but you guys made a whole bunch of stupid decisions," at least in his opinion, to say, basically telling them, I can't do this. I want to go somewhere else to a place where it's more stable with a proven head coach and a proven offense that it is working. Because again, Tampa is having to have yet again another offensive coordinator change. And I'm sure Mike ain't happy about that, given he's an older player and he's, his legacy, and even though it's all been made, but it's reasonable to think that way. I mean, look, if I were in his shoes, yeah, I mean, the way Tampa's, the way they're trending right now, yeah, it's, I know we'll eventually do the record projections during the summer. I'm just saying right now, there's a real possibility that Tampa will probably be, if not, I don't know if they're the worst team, but they will be one of the worst teams in the NFC. I think they're going to. I think there's a real possibility they're going to they're going to tank next year. I think we're going to see a lot of major changes happen. I think just the trajectory and the mood around the franchise, it's not good. This to me definitely is starting to resemble the Dirk Koetter years all over again, where it was very, very stale. No one was happy. It's sort of like, it was very, very, it was almost like you're watching a bulldozer approaching you at 2 miles per hour. You can see it coming, but it's not there yet. So it sucks to lose Mike, but look, in the world of pro football, this happens. Tampa's been through this before. We've lost players that we've respected, that we've wanted to keep around. They've left. Keyshawn Johnson, the guy who was on Undisputed a couple years ago, is one of the co-host. When he was with Tampa and he eventually went elsewhere. We've seen it happen before. We've seen a lot of folks come to Tampa, get drafted here eventually, leave. It happens. But this one hurt, man. This one definitely hurt. I don't hate Mike, but he's no longer with the team anymore, and he's no longer someone that I am really openly rooting for necessarily. He is someone that, he's no longer part of the franchise anymore. It's sad, but I think now after about 24 hours of thinking about it, you can't blame him, can you? You can't. And again, I think this year for Tampa, I know we still have a long ways to go. It's going to be a very, very tough year. And I think next year is going to be probably one of the, if not the worst Tampa season in 10 years. And it really is a shame. It really is. It was just 6 years ago we were celebrating a Super Bowl, and now this drop-off that we're seeing is, again, very, very reminiscent of what happened with John Gruden, right? Gruden, Bucks won the Super Bowl. The drop-off, I'll say this, the drop-off has not been it hasn't been that severe. It's definitely been a lot slower. It's not really that much different. It's scarily similar, at least in the whole entire sequence, right? Now the way it's been executed off, it's a lot different. That drop-off of Gruden was a lot quicker. But it is disappointing that once again Tampa is, it's back in this cycle of, we won the Super Bowl and then we're instead of under Gruden, where it was very, very abrupt, where we went from winning the Super Bowl to not making the playoffs year after. Now it's we're Tampa's somewhat stable. The last 2 years of Tom Brady were second. The middle of those 2 years is really, really good. Last one not so much. And now Tampa is just, there gets the slippery slope down to a very, very, I think is going to be a very, very rough year. And Tampa had opportunities to get better coaches than Todd Bowles. They were out there, and I think we're openly wanting this job, right? And they chose to keep him around. So, yeah, Mike Evans no longer a Buccaneer. A lot of memories for sure, a lot of great memories, and I'll still cherish them. And just generically, even as a college football fan, I will still, remember, I'm thinking it's something this is a eulogy for him. It's not. He's still alive, obviously, duh. But in terms of his career at Tampa, look, I may hate that he's leaving, but as you step back, do the 50,000-foot perspective, as a football fan, I'll still respect him. Look, I'll still go watch his highlights at Texas A&M. I'll still go watch his highlights at Tampa. He's no longer on the team anymore, but I still respect him. But I won't be cheering for him anymore. But as a football and a college football fan, I still respect him. Again, I think his time at Texas A&M was heavily overshadowed by Manziel. Doesn't get enough credit for having just an incredible college career and NFL career. So, this is what it is. He's gone now. We'll move on. But, as a college football fan, I guess if you want to take it from that perspective, I don't hate him. I still think he's one of the best receivers we've ever had in college football. And he sort of gets forgotten because we've had all these other players recently, most notably from Ohio State, that really came in and, reset record books in college football. But I think Mike Evans and his impact at A&M, I will always remember, that A&M Bama game in 2013, that huge 95-yard touchdown pass, and the crowd at Kyle Field going crazy. I remember watching that. I get chills thinking about it right now. I was still cheers as a Bucs fan. I ain't cheering for you right now. I still respect you, but as a player on an opponent, on an opponent team, I can't cheer for you. I respect you, but I can't cheer for you. But I understand why you left. And look, if I was in his shoes, I probably would have left too. That's the show. We'll be back on Thursday, I believe. Yeah, we'll be back on Thursday. We'll, of course, be doing an extra pod tomorrow. So, again, subscribe to the YouTube channel, podcast feed. Make sure you do that. So, until Thursday for the show, live show.